I'm so excited that you took the time to join us on the next episode of Beyond the Culture. This is the show where we embrace change and challenge cultural norms and ideals. I'm your host, Dr. David Walker. So how you doing, Joe?
I'm doing fantastic. Fantastic. Beautiful Saturday morning here in Orlando, Florida. Just finished up our second 5-day session, so I'm a little bit bleary-eyed, but when you called yesterday and said we'd like to talk, as I said before, I always enjoy talking with you, Dr. Walker. So yes, I'm doing great.
Great. Well, it's my pleasure to have you on the show, but please let me give you your official introduction. Today on the show, I have Mr. Joseph Simmons. Joe Simmons is the founder and executive vice president of the Center for Micro-Entrepreneurial Training, and we affectionately call it CMET. Joe is a retired pharmaceutical executive. He worked in sales with Baxter Corporation, Johnson & Johnson, and Sunrise Medical. He has a 30-plus year history of leading rapid market share growth, multiple therapeutic product launches, people development, and exemplary sales performance. Joe has been a mentor at the nonprofit organization in Orlando to assist startups, entrepreneurs, and B2B companies to grow their businesses. Over the past 3 years, he has developed a variety of educational workshops and seminars to address the fundamental business needs of a diverse clientele base. Joe strives to provide those critical learning experiences and personal stories to those entrepreneurs competing in today's challenging business environment. And I do want to say that Joe is a graduate of Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, affectionately known, the Thundering Herd. So I am super excited to have on the show today, Beyond the Culture, my friend, Mr. Joe Simmons. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Yes. Boy, reading that bio, all of a sudden I do kind of feel a little bit older, Dr. Walker.
No, I call it experience. You have experience, and there's nothing like experience.
And I've got the gray hair to kind of prove that I do have the experience too.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So Joe, I want to start this conversation off here. As I mentioned in the bio, you are a retired pharmaceutical executive. And of course, we're living still in COVID-19. And of course, things are getting a lot better. But when the word pharmaceutical comes up, of course, when you're talking about the vaccine, we got Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson and Moderna. So all of these things are relative to the conversation today, pharmaceutical wise. So just kind of tell us a little bit about that experience of being involved with pharmaceuticals. Maybe there's some stories about it, but then also touch on, the current climate and context of pharmaceutical products that we're dealing with today. So just kind of share a little bit about the pharmaceutical, your background, and then bring it up to today.
Sure. Let me start with the second part of your question first. The therapeutic areas that I was involved in was primarily women's health, pain, urology, and cardiovascular. And so I really didn't touch the vaccine marketplace, but because of the two corporations that I worked for, they both had large vaccine business units. Now, when it comes to vaccines, when you look at the two big boys, when you look at Pfizer and Moderna, I mean, their efficacy is plus 90%, which is off the charts. When you consider that during the flu, the best you're going to get is probably anywhere from 50 to 60% efficacy. So efficacious wise, the two drugs that are out there, they're just absolutely prime. Now, I've launched 7 products in my career, and it's amazing how the staging is always the same.
Okay.
You always start out with your early adopters. They pop on it quick, they take the drug, they use it, they write it, they prescribe it. When you look at what we've done now in COVID-19, we hit those people first that really wanted the drug, right? Mm-hmm. And we got off to a great start. Doing a launch, you're going to hit a period where those that are in the middle, they're kind of likely to take it, or they need to be convinced. And it's amazing that's where we are right now. And think about it, we're probably at 60% Americans have now had the first shot. So
Okay.
we're right at that expectation of what you have with the flu vaccine. Now, going back to your first part of your question, I got into pharmaceuticals in '96. And it was really a great time to get into pharmaceuticals because when you think about it, it was a time when the major, what they call big pharma, was going through major expansions. For example, Pfizer went from like 1,000 people on the ground to 8,000 people on the ground. Novartis did the same thing. So you had, a large field forces out there on the ground. But Dr. Walker, what it really did was it changed lifestyles.
Okay.
And it also had an impact on our community. You saw more people of color getting into the pharmaceutical industry. They were able to get in at entry levels and work their way up like I did. You also had people in the corporate side, people on the science side. So it was amazing to see that trajectory from '96 to probably about 2010. And then 2010, because of the impact of generics, it just fell off a cliff. You didn't need a lot of people on the ground. And of course, the first people to go were, of course, people of color. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's still in the market, and he was saying it's amazing. You'd be out in the field, and you'd always run into a person of color, either as a manager, as a sales rep. It's very rare now to see it. It's just it's always the same thing. First in, first out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been my experience with pharma.
You mentioned people of color, our people, and of course, coming back to the vaccines. A lot of us have been challenged with with getting the vaccine because maybe there's a lot of history
Yes.
in America with vaccinations and trials and experiments, and we were highly affected. So what do you think about that? Do you think that we should? What do you think about the continual fear that a lot of African Americans have had concerning taking this vaccine?
Wow. You bring up a good point. We were talking earlier before we went hot. I've got a large family. I've got
Okay.
family in West Virginia, where I was born and raised. I've got family in North Carolina. I also have family here in Florida. And the challenge that you're absolutely right. It's been challenging for me to convince some of them, especially the older ones, that's 70, 80 years old, to take the vaccine. And what I try to tell them is this, most of them drink Coca-Cola.
Okay.
And I always tell them, I said, even though you might be skeptical, how
Uh-huh.
skeptical are you about Coca-Cola? Because if you drink Coca-Cola enough, it'll rot your teeth, it'll take out boots. That's how strong the caffeine is in Coca-Cola. And I said, the other thing you have to put on a personal basis that, you're not really taking the vaccine for yourself. You're taking it for the people around you,
Sure.
for your children, for your other family members that you really want to see. And for us to get through this, where we're not wearing a mask, where we can come together as a group, you have to take the vaccine. Now, of course, they always look at me and go, well, that's because, Joe, you're in the industry, you're being funded by pharma,
Uh-huh.
Novartis is paying you to say this. But I told them, no, I said, from a health standpoint, it is probably the safest drug you can take right now. But
It's always good when you have people that you like, know, and trust in the industry. So you're a good representative of being able to encourage family members to go ahead and take the vaccine. Let me ask you a question.
but
Yeah, go ahead.
I
I'm
also
sorry.
want to finish up with this, Dr. Walker. It's not so much the vaccine, but we're also underserved when it comes to, the big three, diabetes, high blood pressure, and then, cholesterol. And those are the things too that we really have to do is, if you have access to any kind of medical, whether it's a physician assistant, if you have access to the healthcare system, you really have to address those three because I've had, unfortunately, I've lost family members because of diabetes, because of poor heart. I lost my mother because of, she had strokes, heart disease.
Mm.
So along with the vaccine, it's the other things that we have to take care of.
I was going to ask you, do you know Kenneth Frazier? the
Oh,
chairman
yes.
of
I don't
Merck.
know him. I don't know him, but I admire him a lot.
Talk about him a little bit, because he's an African American, highly ranked in the pharmaceutical industry. He works. I think he's the CEO of Merck and Company. So, what do you know about him? And share some thoughts about him.
The one, uh, Ken Frazier has been CEO of Merck for probably about 10 years now. Very respected in the industry. Was able to turn around Merck probably for the first 3 to 4 years of his tenure there.
Okay.
They were struggling in regards to the products that they had. They were pretty stagnant. He was able to bring products to market. So their sales performance has been outstanding under his tenure. But what I really admire about him was the stance that he's taken.
Okay.
As a corporate official for a global corporation, Fortune 500 company, for him to walk away from the table during the last administration because of comments made spoke volumes about him personally, his ethics, what he stands for. And then about 3 months ago, Ken Frazier, Ken Chenault, and Melody Hobson put together the CEO letter.
Okay.
And I watch religiously CNBC in the morning from 6 to 9 o'clock. And the comments that Ken Frazier made and the emotion that he displayed is very rare for a CEO. And he said a couple of things. He said, number one, it is time for corporations to get off the sidelines and get into the game.
Yes. Yes.
Especially when it came to voting rights. And then he said something that really strikes to the core of, basically of capitalism. He said, America had two opportunities to really change the trajectory of racial history in this country. Number one, they didn't have to go with slavery, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. That put them in a totally different, it put them at such an advantage cost-wise when you got free labor.
Right. Sure.
Number two, after Reconstruction, businesses had an opportunity to change the trajectory again. You think about what happened after Reconstruction, the freedom, but then also the repressive nature that went on in the South that again migrated north. And again, corporations stood on the sidelines and did nothing to address that. When you look at the amount of lynchings that were done from 1893 to current time, it was epidemic. I mean, It was such an issue. Now we come to the third chance. We have now we've got another chance to change the trajectory of Black and brown lives in this country, either through voting rights or through economic opportunities. And so for him to come out and deliver that so eloquently, but also hitting to the points of businesses have to get involved now. They can't stay on the sidelines, because one thing in America, green drives everything. That's just the way it is.
Uh-huh.
So I really admire him.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I did see that response was in the New York Times about the Black executives speaking to what was going on, especially in Georgia with the voting rights. And we do have to speak up when issues for our people are front and center. You can't just be up in the penthouse. As an African American, you have to speak to the issues that's on the grounds. One last question about pharmaceuticals. What would you change? I know pharmaceuticals, that industry is major, but if you could just change anything about it, what would you change? And especially concerning our people.
Oh, at 8 o'clock in the morning, you want me to solve one of the biggest issues that we have, and that's access to healthcare. Thanks, Dr. Walker. You're not putting any pressure on me, are you? I would say the one thing that people have to understand is that, as I said before, the big three is cardiovascular with heart, cholesterol, and then diabetes, is that you have to have you can have access to generic medications now that are very efficacious. Now, when I was in the marketplace, 8 out of 10 people were covered by some kind of healthcare insurance. So therefore they could take a branded drug and be able to treat it and control it quite well. In 2020, that dynamic has changed. Access to healthcare has really become an issue for a lot of people. We've just come through the pandemic where people have lost their healthcare. But we always spoke about, and people hate to hear it, but there's also accountability. there's always the three pillars. You've got your medication, you've got diet, and you've got exercise. Now, we can take care of the one, but the retention rate for patients on medications is very, very low. 1 in 10 gets a refill, either because of cost or because of access. So I would say, the issue around healthcare revolves around access to medications, but also the fact that you have to hold yourself accountable. You've got to stay away from that Coca-Cola. You got to stay away from the fried foods that I'm guilty of. And I'm a Southern boy, so I love my pies and cakes.
Sure.
My doctor always tells me to stop that. But, we really have to work around those three pillars. We have to have access to the medication at a cost-effective price, but we also have to exercise and take care of ourselves. And then diet. We've got to start to eat better. And there was a very interesting episode on 60 Minutes. And again, it speaks about opportunities. And they were talking to individuals in Atlanta, and I think it was College Park, but I could be wrong. And Dr. Walker, they called it a food desert because they didn't have access to quality food.
Wow.
And this nonprofit organization went to 3 grocery chains and it said, hey, look, in this area, would you bring in a grocery store that would provide fresh fruit, fresh produce, reasonably priced, groceries? And again, capitalism at its worst, they said those areas do not have access to liquid income to afford groceries.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I mean, think about it. I mean, people are trying to do good, right? They're trying to, they're trying to eat right, but yet and still there was no creativity on the corporate side to say, hey, look, maybe we can do something with mini marts or mini Publix or mini Giant Eagle to really allow, because healthcare is such a major cost to our economy, to us individual, that I was just blown away by that a food desert. And so those are the things that, we've got to work around. And so anyway, I got off on a tangent. Sorry about that.
No, that's good. And I think that's important information to get out. Now, of course, my show is Beyond the Culture. And when I have a guest on, I usually am reaching for people who I consider who have gone beyond the culture. They embrace change. They challenge what I call cultural norms and ideals. And I invited you to come on because you, as I introduced you, you are one of the founders of the Center for Micro-Entrepreneurial Training. And you, along with another good friend of mine, Mr. David Daly, you guys started this entrepreneurial training program. And I consider that going beyond the culture. I consider that, embracing change and challenge those norms and ideals. So what does the organization do? And why did you see the need to start the company?
Well, I'll start with the first part of your question first. The organization is put in place to really provide entrepreneurial literacy to women, Black and brown entrepreneurs, to give them the foundation to be successful. Again, I heard this great comment. I can't pronounce his name correctly, but I think it's Jamal Palapathea, and he was one of the founders of Facebook.
Okay.
And he said, too often we're in the business of trying to level out outcomes when we should be in the business of leveling out people giving everybody the same equal start. So if we give everybody a foundation to be successful, then it becomes really, it boils down what I call 5 components. And the people that come into the process at CMET, or the Center for Micro-Entrepreneurial Training, they come in with 5 things: commitment, the ability to execute, discipline, talent, and skills. Now we provide them with 5 things, and that's planning, financial training, e-commerce marketing, people, and sales. Those are the foundations that we try to accomplish in regards to the training. And then at the back end of it, we want them to be networked with 5 things. That's an attorney, a banker, insurance agent, a mentor or coach, and then also an accountant. So I call it the 515. Those are the 515s that's really the foundation of the organization.
You know, as you were talking, I was smiling inwardly because I went through the training.
And
I
exactly,
I am a CMET grad, and it was
alumni.
an alumni. Yeah, yeah. It's an outstanding program for any person who wants to launch out into, entrepreneurial pursuits and to be successful in business. And you guys give quality training, resources that really can give an entrepreneur a strong foundation to launch out into a business. So how is it going? And just tell us some of the impact that the organization is having,
Well,
other than
first,
graduating me. Listen, that's great impact because I graduated. So go CMET.
I love it. Well, I'm a shameless plug. We do have a training session coming up on June 14th. And for those of you that are interested, simply go to tcemet.org / join if you'd like to attend. And it's going fantastic. I've really been impressed with two things. Number one, the quality of the presenters, because we try to focus on not having academic, academic learning, but we really bring in people that are coming from the business community. So we've been very fortunate to have access to entrepreneurs, business owners who come in and give up their time to talk about those five things, business planning, putting together a pro forma, doing e-commerce on the different digital media platforms, sales and marketing, people hiring, interviewing. And then the last thing, of course, is the sales component, how to go in and present benefits as opposed to features, and then how to prospect and close. And have you been prospecting, Dr. Walker?
Of course.
Okay. But the other thing that's been quite important that we've put together now is the CMET Nation.
Yes.
And that's the networking organization, because it really is important for entrepreneurs to have a support network of people who have common interests, common challenges, common concerns, and then working together, because it's a lot easier when you've got five people around the table trying to come up with an answer as opposed to you by yourself trying to come up with an answer. So again, that's the process those are the pillars that we've put together for budding entrepreneurs.
And as I said, the resources and the assistance that that you and David and others provide are just so outstanding and just so foundational. And you're going to get a great start, especially if you're looking to launch. So many people want to start a business, but they don't have all the information, they don't have all the resources. And so if they would just come to a CMET training, they'll get everything that they need. And I'll give you another chance at the end to kind of talk about that upcoming training. But every now and then I want to shift a little bit, because every now and then I have a guest on the show where I can be, I guess, wide ranging, I'll call it. And just to talk
Here we
about,
go.
talk about other subjects. After meeting you recently, the more we talk, the more I find out things about you and things that we have common interests. I'm an avid sports fan. I told you I used to referee NCAA basketball.
I know. Yeah.
And I used to travel to Huntington, West Virginia, and I used to referee basketball games out at Marshall University. And I found out that, I went there a couple times. What was that league? The Mid-American Conference they were in at one time. They may be somewhere else now. But I used to go out there, and then I found out in your bio that you are a graduate of Marshall. And I want you to talk about that school, because in the sports context, there was a famous or infamous, occurrence that happened with their football team. And I don't know if you were on campus at the time, but I'll talk about a little bit about Marshall, and then that legendary event that happened, because you were right there and you know about it. I'm sure it's somewhere in your heart. Talk about that and the plane crash with Marshall University.
Yes, it was September, and it was 1969. Yeah, 1969, because I started there. Yeah, 68, 69. I forget the exact year. But what had happened was that the football team including the charter members, city fathers, civic groups. They left they left Huntington, West Virginia. They flew down to North Carolina for a football game. Now, while there, all the coaching staff, with the exception of one person, did not come back on that flight. But also there were 3 members of the football team that, because of injuries, didn't go on the trip. And I could be wrong, but the story goes that they changed pilots. On the way back from North Carolina, a thunderstorm hit.
Okay.
And the airport sits on top of a mountain. And on top of that mountain, there are 2 mountains on the side. And because of the pilot not knowing the topography, he crashed. And it wiped out the whole football team. It wiped out city fathers. It just had a dramatic impact on the university, obviously, just a tragic event. I enrolled in Marshall the following year. And Dr. Walker, there was always this cloud over the university. I mean, you think about it, the football team was wiped out, city fathers, you had a situation where the 3 football players that weren't there, they had that syndrome of, why me,
Right,
how is it I survive?
right,
And then they had the challenge of putting together a football team.
right.
And as fate would have it, one of my best friends, who became my best friend, Gene Nance, was at Buffalo, and he transferred to Marshall because he would get a chance to play. And they put together a football team. And the football team it was just, talking to him. It was just, at that point in time in 69, 70, there was no such thing as, a therapist, sports therapist, psychologist to really deal with the emotions that these young men were going through. So there were fights in the locker room, there were fights on the field. I mean, it was just painful, but they were able to achieve one victory in that year.
Okay.
And it changed the whole trajectory for that university. Now, it's odd in that the football team was struggling, but the basketball team was ranked in the top 10.
Right.
Mike D'Antoni,
Yes.
he's now an assistant coach with the Nets.
Okay.
I played against him in high school, but he was also the star guard for Marshall University while I was there. And they brought in Russell Lee from Boston, Mass. And they had they made the NCAAs both years I was there. They were in the top 10. So they had a phenomenal basketball program. But still, the tragedy of that event hung over the university. And then they made a movie about it. The movie was, We Are Marshall.
Yes.
With Matthew McConaughey. And when I went to see the movie, I called my buddy Gene. I asked him, I said, how much fact and fiction was in the movie? And he said, Joe, that movie was 90% factual. He said they really captured the essence of what we went through as a football team.
And when you mention Marshall, and we have a lot of sports fans who listen to our show, so some of this conversation they're going to know about. A great NBA player went to Marshall. You say Hal Greer?
Yeah.
Now that I didn't know.
Yeah.
But I was getting ready to talk about Jason Williams. They call him White Chocolate.
Yeah.
He went to Marshall. And then, of course, the great Randy Moss, the football player, Hall of Famer. He's a graduate of Marshall. So that was interesting.
Yeah, it's people forget that, of course, WVU had Jerry West, and that was always the claim to fame. But very few people know that Wilt Chamberlain was born in West Virginia.
Did you say Jerry West went there?
No, Jerry West went to WVU, West Virginia
Okay,
University.
I said West Virginia. Okay.
But we had Hal Greer, number 15, played for the Philadelphia 76ers. One of the greatest, probably one of the greatest NBA teams of all time, with Wilt, Luke Jackson, and that crew. He went there. We had D'Antoni. Fun fact, my grandnephew ran track against Randy Moss.
Wow.
And he said everybody called him a freak. I remember we were talking about him when he was at Marshall, and he said he could not believe his speed. I mean, just on the hurdles. I mean, he was just untouchable.
Wow.
And he was like 6'5", so him going over the hurdles was no. So yeah, that was for years and years and years. Yeah, Randy Moss put us on the map. I mean, we won. Yeah, we won one Division two championship at Marshall with him there. And we made the playoffs every year. So it was a great time to be a Herd fan.
A Herd fan, yeah. One other thing, if I can stay with the context of sports, we had a conversation recently about a great sports coach, the great George Raveling. Remember George Raveling?
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring him up, one, because we had a conversation about him. But secondly, and not everybody knows this, but you did. When I brought it up, you knew about this. So check for for Joe Simmons. One, he was a great basketball coach, coached at USC. George Raveling coached at USC. He was a part of, I guess, the Olympic team, so on and so forth. But he is also in possession of one of the greatest documents ever in American history, not just Black history, but American history. So talk a little bit about George Raveling, the coach, and then talk about that document that he possesses.
Well, you know what? Because we're contemporaries, we grew up in a time where you had George Raveling, John Chaney, Nolan Richardson, and of course, the great John Thompson. They were all, I think they called themselves the Final Four.
Oh, yeah, that sounds good.
So I really look back upon those men as just such, they were just, like Mount Rushmore when it comes for, just for coaching and what they did. But George Raveling was involved in the civil rights movement. And when the March on Washington was occurring and the speech was about to begin, he positioned himself right beside Dr. King. And as Dr. King was giving his speech, obviously he had his notes there and he was reading it. And then once he finished, George Raveling picked it up because he walked away from the podium and he picked it up and he asked Dr. King, do you want your speech? He said, no, keep it.
Wow.
And so he has the original I Have a Dream speech with the notes. So it's just this quirk of history that he would have that. So yeah, he's an interesting gentleman. And he was one of the first men to get involved with Nike and their basketball shoe program too. So he was at the forefront of a lot of things.
When I heard George Raveling tell the story, he talks about being a last minute volunteer.
Yeah.
To be a part of that March on Washington and to be to help maybe with some kind of security or protection or whatever. But he was a last minute volunteer. And after Dr. Martin Luther King gave that historical, it's labeled the I Have a Dream speech, which everyone knows about, then for George to have it. And over the years, he has placed it in, and people can go online and see that he has placed that, I think it was about 3 or 4 pages of notes. He has placed it in a casing, and its value, if I'm not mistaken, it may be valued, it's worth a lot of money. I don't know the exact number, but he's been offered, large sums of money to sell it to, to give it to somebody to auction it off. And he said no, because that's his legacy. And sometimes you're in the right place at the right time. You know what I'm saying? And you can have something historical. And so that's just a great story to be a part of history in just some small way. So that's a little story about the great George Raveling.
Well, Dr. Walker, they call it closeness. It's called closeness to greatness.
Closeness to greatness. Sure. So as we begin to bring our conversation to a close, I just want to ask you just a couple more questions. Here's the first question. Who inspires you?
Oh, wow. My father still to this day, I'm his son, and I take pride in that. My father was, I look back on my brother and I were talking, my brother's 93.
Wow.
And so
hold on, you said your brother's 93?
Yeah, my brother's 93. And I lost my older brother 2 years ago, and he was 90 when he passed away. My mother passed away at 91. So I've got good genes. Good genes. My wife reminds me of that. But we were talking about my father, and I made the comment that I'm pretty sure my grandmother was a freed slave.
Oh my.
So my father was born in 1902. And I remember him telling me that he came to West Virginia on the back of a buckboard. You know,
Mm.
he was one of the first people to drive a car. Okay.
Uh-huh.
He worked in the coal mines for most of his life. He was able to survive, you know, coal being fall, coal coming, just falling on him and almost crushing him. And he survived that. He was part of the civil rights movement in West Virginia. He was a builder. He was a AME minister, and he he was a mentor to young ministers. He had a great sense of humor.
Mm.
He had great people skills. He was a mason, a carpenter. So, he built the room on our house. We had this, house on a hill of 6 acres. And he was a great storyteller. I
Okay.
mean, he could just tell being a minister, he could tell these stories. But Dr. Walker, what I always remember about him is that when I was 16 years old, I had a 1957 Ford Fairlane. I paid $120 for red and white. And I had to, every Saturday, I had to drive him from Leicester, West Virginia to Logan County. And, there's no major, it's not like Orlando where you've got I-4, 408, 417. There was 2-lane roads going up through the mountains and to this little small town, I think it was called Omar Sterrett. And if they had 3 people in the congregation, that was a good day.
Mm.
And for a year, I did that. And I always observed his preparation. He never shortchanged him. Anything that needed done in the church, he did. And his preparation in regards to, getting his sermons ready, going visiting the sick, the elderly, uh, it resonated with me. It
Okay.
resonated with me. And then he was a he 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 would be embarrassed now to say it, but he was also a Republican captain. So
Okay.
I got to meet Nelson Rockefeller, as a matter of fact,
Wow.
because of him being in, that he was involved. I was old enough to travel with him around West Virginia. So I got to meet governors, people, politicians, things like that. And he was, he was just to me, he was a bigger than life person because of what he did and how he lived his life and what he gave back to the community and his giving. And
Mm.
I guess that's, certain things are part of your DNA and part of your genes. You just can't get away from.
Sure.
And then I remember the one thing that will always stay with me is that I was in the 7th grade and we were going to a segregated school. So it was a three room school. And my father and mother were avid paper readers.
Okay.
The paper came that morning and it gave our school an A+ rating. And I've never seen my father so mad. He said,
Wow.
how could they give an A+ rating to a 3-room school that had outdoor toilets?
Wow.
He got dressed. He said, come with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, I've never seen my father this mad. What's going on? We got in the car. We drove to the county seat, which was about 10 miles away. And we go into the Board of Education office. And he sits me outside. He goes inside. I, hear a conversation. He comes back out. He's still mad. We get in the car. We go to Charleston, West Virginia. I'm like, okay, and it's quiet, so it's like an hour, kind of like, is dad gonna what's going on? We're all over the place. We go into the governor's office. We come out, and he said, your 8th grade, you'll be going to an integrated school.
Were you in the 7th grade at the time?
7th grade, yeah. He integrated the schools in Raleigh County.
Wow.
Yeah, that was
Wow.
the pull he had, and he never used it except for a couple of times. But just that anger and the fact that he had the connections to
Mm-hmm.
get things done, spoke. I kind of knew my father, but now I really knew my father. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Wow. What a great story. Sometimes it just seems like when you see something, I guess we'll say unjust, you just can't continue to watch it any longer. And you have to step up. You have to make change.
Yeah.
You can't, challenging the cultural norms and ideals. And that's exactly what
Yeah.
your dad did. And I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That's a great story. And, Joe, we had a great conversation today about, we talked about various things, and that's why I wanted you on, because I knew that you would provide a great conversation for us today. And as we close, I just want you to give us just one more, as you say, shameless plug about an upcoming CMET training, because someone may be listening, and we want them to have an opportunity if they're getting ready to launch out into as an entrepreneur. There's a great training come up. So just go ahead, tell us one more time about the upcoming training, and also any social media information you'd like to give about you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Walker. Yes, for all your aspiring or established entrepreneurs, if you'd like to build your foundation of entrepreneurial literacy in regards to 5 things: planning, finance, marketing, e-commerce, people, and sales, please join us just simply by going to our landing page, which is tcmet.org/join, or just simply call me. You can call me at 661-527-2638. We'll get you signed up. The training session is a 5-day immersive training. It starts on June 14th, and it is done on a virtual platform that we're on right now, Zoom. So please take advantage of it. And guess what the cost is? $0. So thank you. Thank you for allowing me the shameless plug.
The cost is $0, but it is worth, well, I was going to say every dime, but it don't cost nothing. The resources of the training is invaluable. I'll put it that way, and it will be worth your time if you participate. So, Joe, I want to thank you for coming on the show and interviewing today. We had a great conversation, and as I say to all my guests, you have gone beyond the culture, and I appreciate you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I really, really enjoyed it.
All right, Joe. Thank you very much. Take care. Now, if you want to continue to hear inspiring interviews like the one you heard today, I want you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Also, rate the show and please leave a comment. I would also love it if you would share this podcast with your friends to let them know that we're on. Finally, please go to our website at www.beyondtheculturepodcast.com, or you can email me at beyondtheculturepodcast@gmail.com. On the website, you can subscribe to the show and connect with me by leaving your email address. I'd love to hear from you. This is your host, Dr. David Walker, and we'll talk again on Beyond the Culture. Take care.